Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Well, as with last week, the holidays have really thrown a wrench into my gears here as far as keeping up to date with my schedule. So I'm a little behind, but hopefully this will end things as far as the staging yard itself goes, and then we'll be able to move on in the future to talking about the control panel and the ESP wireless system that I'm going to be using with it. So what I want to do today, though, is cover three basic topics. First, I want to talk about the closed circuit TV system that I'm installing here on the layout, and you can see the screen right here behind me for that display, and I'll bring that forward and show you that in a minute. And then after we take a look at that and the cameras and how that's installed under the layout and how it's going to be used, then we're going to move on and take a look at an Illuminator accessory decoder that I'm going to be using here on the layout for controlling the power to one of the tracks. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. I'll show you how it's all put together, and I'll give you a demo of how it works. And after that, I want to move on and talk about rail gaps, because as I was cutting the gaps on the staging yard tracks, I didn't get into the topic of whether or not you want to close up those gaps and which gaps you want to close and why. I do it a slightly different way, so I want to show you how I do it and the other alternative, the quick and easy method. So let's go ahead and get started with those three topics here on the DCC guide. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Let's go ahead and take a look at the closed circuit TV system as I just mentioned. This is the display, the monitor for that, and it's completely wireless. You can see we've got an antenna here that receives the images, the image signals from the cameras here on the layout. I have the cameras still turned on, as you can see. So this view, you're seeing the staging yard that I've installed here in previous weeks, and you're looking into the staging yard itself. So trains, let me see if I can do this upside down. Trains will be coming in here, and they will go up the yard ladder to one of the various staging yard tracks here in the background. So engineers will be able to see when their trains are moving into the yard or coming out of the yard. There won't be that typical confusion you get in hidden staging yards of whether or not a train is moving, if it's going in or out of the right track, those kind of things that normally come up. Now I have two cameras set up for this. Right now you're looking at one of them, and I can have this set up so that it automatically cycles between the various cameras. It can pair with up to 4 cameras at a time. I only have 2, and that's one mistake I made. I should have bought 4 when I was buying these, because they're a lot cheaper when you buy it as a package. So remember that when you see these on eBay, that it's cheaper in the long run to go ahead and buy 4 cameras instead of just 1 or 2 or 3. Okay, let me go ahead, because what I can do is switch this so that we can do a split screen display and show all 4 or both cameras at the same time. So again, right here in this one is that same image we were just looking at, where trains come into the yard and go up the yard ladder and into the various tracks. Now in this view here, we're looking down the ladder, so the exact opposite direction. So we can watch as a train moves out over the turnout and proceeds down the yard ladder to go up the helix and come up to the main level here on the model railroad. So we've got all of these tracks here, and engineers will be able to see when their trains start to move. And because I'll have LEDs on each one of the switch machines, and only one will come on at a time, you'll be able to see whether or not your track is powered as well. In addition to using it in areas like this, such as hidden staging yards, I could also envision installing cameras in the helix, so we can keep track of trains as they proceed up or down the helix, because that can often be a protracted process, and people can get kind of anxious about, where their train is in that process. Another use for these type of camera systems is just in the layout room in general. And I have a friend who on his model railroad, he has a setup similar to this, and the cameras are pointed at bottlenecks on the layout so that the dispatcher at the dispatcher's desk can keep track of what's going on at various places on the layout, and he can adjust traffic flow accordingly. So it's just, several uses that you can put to these. And I said earlier, they're not that expensive really when you consider that they probably are not going to cost you any more than a brand new locomotive with a sound decoder installed in it. You can notice the small size of these. They're very small. This one here will fit on one of the shelves that I have along the front of the layout. And I showed you guys how to build and install one of those on the modules when we were building the modules. So this monitor will be set up on the shelf above the staging yard, along with the control panel that they'll be using to access the various tracks in the staging yard so they can get their trains in or out of there. So let's go ahead now and I'll show you the cameras and the setup for those underneath of the layout. Now this is the camera located at the top of the ladder. So that is looking back at the ladder. And you can see at this location, it allows you to see the entire ladder, what is coming up the ladder, and it also allows you to see the individual staging yard tracks. So you can see which ones are empty, which ones are full, and more importantly, you can see when a train is moving or not. And that's one of the important things that you want to be able to see in this kind of setting. So you can see right here, it's a very straightforward, just a plain old black camera with an antenna located right here that sends out the signal to the receiving monitor that I showed you a minute ago, and then a wire that comes down and is plugged into an outlet here on the back side of the leg here of the layout. Fortunately, these come with these nice little mounts with a swivel mount right here and screw holes in the base. So I was able to screw this directly to the upright here under the layout at an elevated position so you could see straight down that yard ladder. Very convenient, easy to install. All you have to do is plug in the power supply right here for that, and the camera comes right on. They come already paired with the monitor that you have ordered. So if you get 4 cameras, you can just plug in all 4 cameras, plug in the monitor, and you're up and running immediately after that. It's that quick and easy. Let's go ahead and take a look at the camera down at the other end of the yard. This is the camera located at the other end of the yard. And you can see back in the background there, you can see the track that comes into the yard from the helix. So we're coming into the yard. So this camera located right here, I have it set up temporarily on a wire spool, and it gets it elevated enough so that you can look down and see that image of the trains coming in and moving up the ladder and onto the individual tracks that they are assigned for. Now what I have here is a simple 6-outlet power strip with the power supplies for the camera and for the monitor. And then this wire right here goes up to the monitor, and I'll show you that in a minute where I have it set up there. Otherwise, the camera is essentially the same as the one up at the top. And so it gives you a good image of what's coming and what's going as far as the yard ladder and the movement of trains in the staging yard. I wanted to show you the setup of the display. I just got it set up here on one of my shelves in front of the main yard at Monroe. And of course, the staging yard is located down in here beneath that. As you can see, it just sits very nicely out here on the layout shelf, leans up against the fascia. It has a small prop on the back that you can use to prop it up right and have it sit on a flat surface somewhere if you don't have a shelf. Plus, there are screw mount holes cast into the back of the case itself. So you could put a couple of screws in and just hang it on the side of the fascia. So there's several different ways that you could set these up. Other than that, it is completely plug and play. It's completely ready to go when you get it. So that's very simple, straightforward, easy to use, easy to set up closed circuit TV system for use on your model railroad. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the Illuminator accessory decoder setup that I'm going to be using for controlling track power to track number 9 in the staging yard. I previously showed you guys the Illuminator and the Light It accessory decoders, and these are basically designed for two different purposes. The Light It is used for lighting individual LEDs, whereas the Illuminator is designed with these sockets on it. And those are specifically for attaching the Woodland Scenics Just Plug lights directly to this board. And it supplies the 12 volts that is required to operate the Just Plug lights. And the Just Plug lights have their own resistors so that you don't blow the LED when you feed it 12 volts. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm using this relay. Now this relay is a 12 volt relay, which means that I can power it off of one of the outlets here. There's 3 outlets on this board, and they all come on at the same time, or you can use different lighting effects, but I'm going to have a steady on output, so it puts out a steady 12 volts. And built into this relay is a single pole, single throw switch. Now that's a simple on-off switch. So what's going to happen is when I send a command to this accessory decoder for it to come on, it is going to send out 12 volts from one of these sockets here, and that's going to power this relay. It's going to turn the relay on. And then on these contacts right here on the bottom, I'm going to attach one wire from the main DCC power bus, and then the other wire will go to the track that I want to turn power on and off to, or to the rail anyway that I want to turn on and off. So when I turn the accessory decoder on, the single pole, single throw switch is going to trip and turn power onto that track or to that rail. When I turn the accessory decoder off, that's going to turn the relay off, and it's going to interrupt power to that rail, and it's going to become unpowered, and locomotives will stop. Now, several people have asked me, why am I going to all this trouble to provide all this wiring and capability to turn power on and off to each individual track? However, there's several things to consider. First of all, I have 9 tracks under here, some of which can hold more than one train, and several locomotives, 2 to 3 locomotives for each train. So you're talking about 20 to 30 locomotives. And if somebody leaves the sound on several of those, it can get very annoying very quick. Plus, it really isn't all that good for the decoder to be left on all the time if it doesn't need to be. And one thing that I have found with years of use of DCC systems over the last 25 years at operating sessions and the like, is although people have the best of intentions with following the rules about turning power off and turning sound off and lights off and things like that, they have the best of intentions, but they rarely follow through on those because they get excited or they forget or various reasons. And for that reason, I'm engineering in a way to take care of those lapses of memory that people have. And that way, only one track at a time will be powered up, and then the rest of the time, power is going to be turned off to that track. And it's going to be true for all 9 tracks in the yard. And therefore, I won't have to worry about all of that noise. And more importantly, I won't have to worry about locomotives creeping forward because somebody did not get the throttle set to 0. Maybe they got it to speed step 1 or 2 or something like that, or somebody, they knocked the throttle as they were putting it away, whatever. And all you need is the locomotives on one track to start creeping along and push the train over a turnout that's thrown against it and create a short, and abruptly in the middle of the session you've got to take care of a short circuit underneath of a hidden staging yard. So this is just a way of using technology to take care of human failures. So that's why I do it. Another thing I'm using here, you'll see on one of these outlets, I've installed an LED. with a dropping resistor on it. And what that is for is it's going to be facing towards the camera. And I'm going to have a red LED on each one of the switch machines as well as this device here. So that when the relay is turned on and the track is powered up, this LED will also come on. And so people watching through the closed circuit TV system will be able to see the LEDs light up and know that their track that they just threw a switch for is actually powered up. So it serves another purpose in that respect. And you can connect up to 3 devices, 12 volts each, are put out here on each one of these terminals, and 100 milliamps maximum. So that's one thing you have to be aware of. It does have a 100 milliamp rating, so you don't want a relay that is so big that it's going to, eat up a lot of your amperage. So with this one, I think it's probably about 10 or 20 milliamps, and the same thing here for the LED, so it'll be safe. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll move to down underneath of the layout and get into the staging yard, and I'll show you this setup and I'll give you a demo of how it actually works. Now let me point out, I'm going to be using a throttle to activate the accessory decoder. But once I get the control panel installed, I'll be using a switch on the control panel to actually do that. Okay, we've moved down here underneath of the layout into the staging yard, and this is that track number 9 that I was telling you about. So this track number 8 is controlled by the IP digital switch machine, which is number 8, and so it controls the track power here, but there's nothing to control this one. So what I wanted to do then is have an accessory decoder set up in addition that would allow me to throw power on and off to this track, as I told you earlier. Okay, so here we have it installed. You can see I have the red and the green wires attached to my DCC bus, and I've shown you how I use, this is that audio zip cord 14 gauge that I use for my power bus wiring on both my layout here and on the module that we built. And you can see this is the accessory decoder, the Illuminator. And when the Illuminator is turned on, as I said, it will output at 12 volts to each of these 3 sockets here on the board. And this LED will come on red, and this relay, we've got the red and the black wires attached to the relay. And one thing to note, if you do buy an Illuminator for this, the wires, the wire colors of the harnesses that come with it are backwards. So red is negative, black is positive in this case. Now that might not be true for all cases, but in this case, that's what NCE ended up with. So be very careful of that, and it is shown in one of the diagrams in the Illuminator manual about this being negative and that being positive. The convention, of course, is for red to be positive, black to be negative. And here you can see a green wire coming off of the main bus that connects to one of the poles on the single pole, single throw switch built into the relay. And then this is the wire that goes out to this track right here, or this rail right here on the back. So it's soldered right there. So when I turn this, the Illuminator on, the red light will come on, and the relay will trip, and power will flow to this rail back here, and any locomotives on that particular track will then be powered up. Then when I flip the switch the other way and turn track power off, they're all going to stop. So let's go ahead and take a look, a demo at how that works. Okay, here we are. I've got the Illuminator installed under the layout. You can hear, I hope, that the loco is running there in the background. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and bring up that switch 509, and then I'm going to start the locomotive moving, and then I'm going to turn power to that track off, and you can see what happens. So you can see it stops it dead in its tracks and cuts the sound off, which is what I want. And I just cut it back on again. There we go. And we'll run it on back. Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. Let's go ahead now and talk about rail gaps, because I did get a couple of responses or comments back from people asking why I didn't use these plastic or nylon insulated rail joiners. And these are typically used, this is for code 100, and I believe these are the old Atlas ones. And these are the microengineering for code 83. And these are cast in brown, and these are cast in clear plastic. I've seen these in orange and I think black, but can't remember exactly on that one. And this will give you an idea of how they're used. They're just slid on onto the end of the rail here, and then you would slide the other piece of rail in here, and that would provide a insulated gap between the two pieces of rail. And that works fine at the end of a turnout like this. So this is a code 100 track with that Atlas on it. One question is, why don't I use these, or why didn't I use them? Well, I don't like them, to be honest with you. And that's why I prefer not to use them. And I've not used them here on the layout at all. I've tried using these a couple of times, and I really don't like them. I don't like the fact that, you know, they don't match the ties in most cases. So in my opinion, the microengineering version cast in brown, and it is very small. This is probably the better of the two evils, or the lesser of the two evils, let's say. So if I were going to use one, I would use the microengineering version here. They also do not work in a situation like this where you've cut a gap like I did in a couple of places. And so for these, I go ahead and I insert a piece of styrene in here, and I'll show you that process here in a second. And that's the method that I prefer to use for just filling all of my rail gaps. Now, in some cases, you might not want to actually fill in the gap. In a situation where, for example, you wanted to leave a free unsoldered rail joiner between two pieces of track to allow for expansion and contraction. In the case of expansion, you want to leave a little open gap there so that the rail can actually close if it starts to expand. And so in those cases, you don't want to use any kind of a rail joiner like these insulated ones that are actually going to fill in that gap for you, because that's going to defeat the purpose of having an expansion joint in there. But for other purposes, what I'm going to show, you can use these, you know, they're perfectly fine, and they work, but I have my own objections to them as to why I don't use them. So let me show you what I do use. Now this is an old Atlas Code 100 number 5 turnout, I believe. And you can see I've cut a gap right here using my Dremel tool like I did underneath of the layout for the other gaps that I did. So how I go about that is, this is just right here a piece of 040 thick styrene. So that's 0.040 inches in thickness. And what I'm going to do, I'll show you right here, this fits perfectly in the opening there, that gap that I've cut. What I'm going to do is take some of the Loctite super glue gel and put a little bit out of it here on the end of this toothpick. And I'm going to spread it into that opening here between those rails. And then I'm going to insert this piece of styrene in that opening. And just leave that sit until that sets up. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to want to do is just cut this off flush with the top of the rail. So I'm just going to hold it here and cut it right across the top. Flush with the top of the rail as I can get it. Okay. Give it a couple of cuts, and then it should just pop right off flush. Okay. Now, at this point, I'm just going to take and use my X-Acto knife like this, and I'm going to cut it off flush there just to make sure. So that's got it flush. Then I'm going to come to the inside, and I'm going to do the same there. Just come straight down on it like that. Cut that off. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the outside of the rail. Okay, so now I've got it cut off there. I'm going to go back and give it a little bit more super glue just in case I knocked it loose in the process of cutting it, because that is possible, because you're putting a lot of pressure on that. And we'll just put that in there. and put some on both sides, like this. Okay. And I'm going to let that set up now. And now I have a couple of small files. These are small jeweler's files. This is a round one with a tapered end, and this is a flat one right here, and it's slightly rounded on the back side. So I can take that and go ahead and just clean up that styrene on the inside and the outside of the rail, get it smoothed down to where it's flush, and it's not going to interfere with the wheels. So we'll do it both sides. And we'll give it a flat touch up here on the top. And once this is painted, you're not going to even know it's there. It's much less visible than those plastic or nylon rail joiners that you can get commercially. And this is a very common process. You'll see it in a lot of articles in the various hobby magazines. So it's not something that, it's unique to me. I didn't come up with it. I learned it from reading articles in Model Railroader myself. And that's how I fill gaps and deal with gaps here on the Piedmont Southern. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. I really think that installing a closed-circuit TV system on a model railroad that has a lot of hidden trackage, that has a helix, that has a hidden staging yard, or a staging yard that's even just out of sight, can really add a lot as far as allowing you to see what's going on out there without having to go ducking under into places that are not easily accessible. So these systems are readily available on eBay and Amazon.com and places like that. And they sell for probably less than you're going to end up paying for a brand new locomotive with sound already installed. So it's something that, you consider and factor in to your budget when you're planning your model railroad, and go with it accordingly. Take it easy, have a great week, and we'll see you here on Friday with a look at the new DCC Concepts ESP wireless system that I'm using here for the control panel on the staging yard at the Piedmont Southern. Bye now.